Hey guys, it's me again, Joseph, your host, and welcome back to Catechism for Kids. On September 6th, we celebrate the feast of Saint Magnus of Füssen. Now that name might not mean anything to you, but stay tuned, and I promise by the end of this episode, you'll know a thing or two about him, and maybe even call him your patron saint. Let's get started. Now, the first thing you should know about Saint Magnus is that he was a missionary monk who traveled throughout Germany during the 8th century, spreading the Christian faith. But before we get to that part of his life, let's go back to the beginning. Saint Magnus of Füssen is a religious priest, monk, abbot, missionary, spiritual student of Saint Columban and Saint Gall at Allgäu, part of modern Switzerland, at the monastery at Füssen, Bavaria, in modern Germany. Magnus is the patron saint of the Allgäu von Füssen and Kempten, and is invoked for the protection of cattle against eye diseases, snakebite, worms, rats, mice, and field insects. His feast is celebrated on the 6th of September. Saint Magnus was both a monk and a missionary. An interesting story involves him bringing reconciliation between Saint Gall and his master Saint Columban. He is also venerated as one of the holy helpers invoked in time of plague, such as the Black Death. Magnus was a monk at Saint Gall. One moving story involving him is that, on learning of the death of Columbanus, whom Gall had refused to accompany to Bobbio in Italy, Gall sent Magnus to pray at Columbanus's grave. Magnus returned with St. Columbanus's staff, which on his deathbed Columbanus had instructed to be given to Gall. As a gesture of reconciliation in the quarrel which a few years before had separated them, Magnus is said to have succeeded Gall after his death. Invited by a priest of Augsburg, Magnus went with the support of Bishop Wichbert of that diocese to preach to the pagan people of the Allgäu region of Bavaria. When he was left alone, Wichbert sent some young clerics to help him, and these formed a monastic community, later known as Saint Mang at Füssen. In Bavaria, Magnus helped the locals clear the land for cultivation and began a mining industry in a nearby mountain. Magnus died after 26 years of missionary work, and his relics were turned to Saint Gall. He is usually represented as treading on serpents. He is also named as one of the 14 holy helpers invoked against storms, insects, dragons, and other disasters, such as the Black Death. There is almost no reliable information about him. The only source is an old Vita S. Magni, which however contains so many obvious anachronisms that little reliance can be placed on it. It relates that the two Irish missionaries, Columbanese and Gallus, spent some time with Willimar, a priest at Arbonne. Here Gallus fell sick and was put in charge of Magnus and Theodore Magnold and Theodo, two clerics living with Willimar, while Columbanus proceeded to Italy and founded Bobbio Abbey. When Gallus had been miraculously informed of the death of Columbanus, he sent Magnus to pray at his grave in Bobbio. Magnus returned with the staff of Columbanese, and thereafter they followed his rule. After the death of Gallus, Magnus succeeded him as superior of the cell. About this time, a priest of the Diocese of Augsburg, named Tazo or Toto, came as a pilgrim to the grave of Gall and invited Magnus to accompany him to the eastern part of the Allgäu. Magnus proceeded to Aptaticus Epfuk, where Wicterp, Bishop of Augsburg, received him and entrusted him with the Christianization of the eastern Allgäu. He penetrated into the wilderness, then crossed the river Lech at a place still known as Saint Mangstrit Footstep of Saint Magnus, and built a cell, where afterwards the monastery of Füssen was erected and where he died. He was buried in the church he had constructed. When 851, he was reburied in the newly erected church. One of his bones was sent to St. Gallen in Switzerland. Around the year 1100, all his bones were found to be missing. The burial place can be seen in the crypt of Saint Mang Basilica, Füssen. A tiny splinter of the breastbone was sent from St. Gallen to Füssen, and this is now located in a large glass cross hanging above the main altar. It also contains the staff, cross, and chalice of the saint. The life was said to have been written by Theodore, the companion of Magnus, under whose head it was placed in the grave. When in 8551 Bishop Lanto transferred the relics to the newly erected church of Füssen, this life is said to have been found in a scarcely legible condition and to have been amended and rewritten by Ermenrich, a monk of Ellwangen. It was re-edited with worthless additions in 1070 by Otto of St. Emmeram. A manuscript is preserved at the Abbey of St. Gall, Codex 565. The chief inconsistencies in the life are the following. Magnus is made a disciple of Gall, died 627. and at the same time he is treated as a contemporary of Wichbert. The first historically established bishop of Augsburg died about 749. Other manifest impossibilities have induced Mabillon and other authorities to reject the whole life as a forgery of a much later date. Another school of thought, however, is that the second part of the life was written in 851 in Ellwangen, although probably not by Ermenrich, when the relics of the saint were transferred there. While the first part, where Magnus is made a companion of Gaul, is a later addition, which may incorporate the remains of the story of an earlier saint also called Magnus. This second view seems to have attracted greater support. In reality, Magnus was probably working on behalf of Bishop Wicterp together with Tasso and Theodor from about 746 in Allgäu. He first worked with Theodor. Together, they established an abbey dedicated to the Virgin Mary in Gorganus and Epimachus at Kempten, the first in the Allgäu region. While Theodor remained in Kempten, Magnus worked on the Upper Lech, and in 746 built a prayer house in Waltenhofen near Schweingo. He then founded a cell and oratory at Füssen, from which a monastic community grew. Its location on the old Via Claudia Augusta from Augsburg to northern Italy gave it strategic importance, and the abbey received support from Pepin the Short. The veneration of Saint Magnus was carried to the New World by the German Catholic peasant pioneers, whom Francis Xavier Peers had persuaded to settle in central Minnesota following the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux in 1851. Magnus, whose intercession was credited with the defeat of the 1856 to 1857 Rocky Mountain locust plague, continued to be widely venerated in and around Stearns County, Minnesota. As a patron of good harvests, and as the protector against lightning, hail, and plagues of vermin. Furthermore, his feast day on September 6 continued to be celebrated until well into the 1870s, both in and around Jacobs Prairie, Minnesota, as Grasshopper Day. The cult of Saint Magnus of Cuneo may have arisen as a result of the expansion of Magnus of Fussen's cult into Italy, with Magnus of Cuneo mistakenly being considered a separate saint. So now you know a little bit about Saint Magnus of Füssen. Hope that if you didn't know him before, that you've come to love him and maybe even call him your patron saint. Remember, God has placed you here for such a time as this. You are exactly where you need to be right now. So take that opportunity to shine your light and share your faith with those around you. And don't forget to check out our St. Joseph's Corner channel, where we're taking the truths of the Catholic faith and turning them into awesome cartoons. I'd also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our supporters for making these videos possible. If you would like to support us, please consider to be a member of our channel. With that said, I'll see you next time on the adventures of Catechism for Kids. Bye for now, and God bless you always.